will be added to the website. It will be added to the website. It will be sent out in an email. Additionally, I will be taking notes and including them in the follow-up email as well as on our website. Because this is being recorded, if you prefer not to have your camera on, that is perfectly welcome. We also love seeing your faces and love when people are engaged. So we also love a camera on. Since we are going to be a larger group, if you want to continue putting your names in the chat, your pronouns, your organization, if you want to connect with other people, we love an email in there. This is an opportunity for you all to connect together since you all have very valuable and helpful information as well. So today we have Jeremy, and Jeremy is a Chicago-based gardener who believes gardens can be more meaningful spaces for healing and connection. For many years, he stretched out his green thumb with vegetables and herbs, and then he discovered the need for more backyard biodiversity. He replaced his front lawn with a pollinator garden and got lots of strange looks from his neighbors, but he also received a lot of interest from friends and curious passersby. After acquiring a certification in horticulture therapy from the Chicago Botanic Gardens, Jeremy started Wild World Gardens to share his love of gardening with others and to help them transform their landscapes into beautiful and beneficial ecosystems filled with food, medicine, and connections to local wildlife. He has worked with patients at Schwab Rehab Center and students at Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center to combine therapeutic horticulture with creating habitat for struggling species, and he is convinced that gardens can heal and support the whole community of life. Today, we are talking about how to work with pests, with animals and insects in your garden and the importance of them. So I'm very excited to welcome the awesome Jeremy, and I will let you take it away.
Hi, thank you, Elizabeth. Thanks so much. Good to see you all, friends, fellow gardeners. Hello, happy spring. Thank you to Chicago Grows Food, an amazing organization. I did a couple workshops with them last year, so always happy to be involved and be part of their work. They do great programming, great education for everyone across Chicago, who are interested in gardening and creating food and healing and health and habitat, in our landscapes, in our gardens. So my name is Jeremy Ohmes. As Elizabeth said, I started Wild World Gardens about 5 years ago, and I came to gardening like many people just through raised bed, vegetable, herb gardening. Kind of grew up doing that as a kid, and then you know finally in Chicago, like you did gardening with containers and on a balcony, containers and pots, and then finally had some space in a backyard, so I was able to put in raised beds. And then I started incorporating more and more native plants into my garden, taking out sections of lawn, planting native plants, seeing just like the biodiversity increase in my yard, and my vegetable plants being much happier and much more productive, seeing more interesting and beneficial insects come to my yard, birds, other wildlife, and just creating a sanctuary. And so that's what I try to help do with Wild World Gardens. We do a lot of like native plant landscaping in residential areas in people's front yards, backyards, parkways. Parkways is a big space for us to try to transform and convert into from just kind of neglected turf grass into habitat. Um, some of my favorite projects definitely involve combining edible gardens with native plants, and as well as like herbs. So um, hit me up after this if you need any help or advice, or we do everything from design to consultations to installation to maintenance and stewardship of gardens. And Elizabeth will provide my info at the end. But yeah, so I like to say that we try to co-create gardens for habitat, health, and healing. So trying to empower people to co-create gardens, create gardens to provide themselves with food, not only for themselves, for the human element, but also food for insects and pollinators, habitat, obviously, for insects, pollinators, birds, wildlife, and then just thinking about this, healing aspect, which is near and dear to my heart as I kind of come from a horticultural therapy background. How can we use our gardens to heal spaces and to heal and be more connected to place and be more connected to our landscape? So that's a big factor and part of my philosophy and mission with my work. So I'm going to share my screen. We're today kind of aligned with all of that. We're going to talk a lot about guests in our garden, I guess, is what we'll say. Language is important to me, so how we frame these these aspects of gardening, I think goes a long way. So we're going to talk about guests, wanted and unwanted guests, wildlife in our garden, insects, birds, rabbits, squirrels, rats, things like that, and what we can do to invite and or deter them. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation. Feel free to pop questions in the chat. If things come up, I'll try to get to them definitely at the end or maybe during the presentation. But here we go. Let's see here. Okay. Everyone see that?
Yes.
Awesome. Perfect. All right, so here we go. Like I said, told you a little bit about myself and Wild World Gardens, co-creating gardens for habitat, health, and healing. So kind of the main topic or theme for this presentation, this talk, this conversation is going to be gardening with urban wildlife. So co-creating gardens with instead of against nature. Too often we are always fighting and sort of pushing back against nature. And so I'm hoping that we can talk about ways that we can embrace what we have and use it to garden with nature and to create biodiversity and work with our environment and the wildlife and insects that come to our gardens. I gotta move this. Sorry, this is blocking my view here. There we go. So, okay, much better. Okay, so living in Chicago, like I live in Portage Park, northwest side of the city. I'm guessing all of you are sort of in the city or Chicagoland area. So, we're very lucky to live in an urban environment, coexisting with creatures of all kinds. I mean, one thing that always surprises me pleasantly and, that I love is that, we have lots of animals here, even though we're in a very densely populated city. So these animals and insects are essential parts of our urban ecosystems. These are just some, I think, camera shots from the Urban Wildlife Institute at Lincoln Park, just around city places. Coyote, deer, skunks, raccoons, you name it. So, those animals and insects are part of our ecosystem. Our gardens are also part of this ecosystem, or at least they should be. I always love this sign. If something is not eating your plants, then your garden is not part of the ecosystem. I know that sounds counterintuitive to really what we think about when gardening, but that is definitely an important part of our gardens, providing that food and habitat, not only for ourselves, but for other species. So when you plant a garden, essentially you are sending out an invitation to other species. Come on over. There's going to be something here. So you are guaranteed to have guests at your garden party. Some of these guests we're excited to see, right? Love to see monarchs, monarch caterpillars, monarch butterflies. Milkweed, of course, is the host plant for monarch caterpillars or monarch butterflies. The leaves are the only thing, milkweed leaves are the only thing that monarch caterpillars can eat. So and that's an iconic species. We love the monarchs, love the black swallowtails that, are on our dill or carrots or golden Alexanders, ladybugs, very beneficial insects. Love to see those, in our garden helping out. Something popped up here. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. Here's some other sort of, guests and insects and species that we love to see in our garden. Really, you don't have any complaints, right? Bumblebees, birds like goldfinches, on the pale purple coneflower there. Squash bees help pollinate our squash blossoms. Swallowtails, rusty patch bumblebee, which is an endangered species in these parts, and we need to try to help create habitat to repopulate that species. Monarch butterflies, like I said, cardinals, hummingbirds, even moths, very important pollinators in our gardens and in our landscapes. And these are some of the plants that they like. A lot of these are native plants that we try to, at least as part of our organization business, try to help people grow. Other guests we're not so thrilled about, right? Japanese beetles, squash bugs, aphids, slugs, cabbage loopers, grasshoppers, squash vine borers, cutworms, flea beetles, potato beetles. These are guests, often called pests that they do some damage to our a lot of our vegetable crops in our garden plants. And so we're not too psyched to have these guests in our garden all the time. Same with some of these, as cute and cuddly as rabbits and squirrels can be, they also do some pretty serious damage to our gardens. Rats, raccoons, not really invited to the garden party, but they'll show up anyway. And so what can we do? Sort of discourage or distract them from eating our plants and being part of our, hanging out in our garden at a detrimental level. So we talked a lot about, like I was mentioning, language and how that's complicated. And same with a lot of these creatures that come to our gardens, we have complicated relationships with them. So what might be considered a pest, quote unquote, in some situations can also become an important part of our garden ecosystem. So for example, up top there, you have the tomato or the tobacco hornworm, which you see those on your tomato plants and you're just like, no, they're destroying my tomato plants. So the first instinct is to get rid of them, right? Which is a natural instinct. You spend all this time, starting these tomatoes, planting them, you want to get a fruit crop, a nice crop of tomatoes. And so to have these hornworms chomping down on them, damaging your tomato plants, yeah, you want to take care of it. But those tomato hornworms also morph into what is the sphinx moth later in life, which is a very beneficial pollinator. So what might be a pest initially in our eyes can be something very beneficial later on in its life cycle. And so how do we navigate that complication, not only with language, but also just with garden practices and strategies? Do we want to get rid of all the tomato hornworms? Maybe not. We'll talk about that. Plus, we need the unpopular guests, quote unquote, pests, to attract the beneficial guests, right? So those beneficial insects and those birds that we want to attract to our garden, they need those unpopular guests, those pests and those not so beneficial insects. So here's a chickadee eating a cabbage looper. And so really kind of the main theme going through this whole presentation is how do we strike a balance? Provide, like, allowing some wiggle room for some unpopular, not so beneficial pests, guests, in order to attract the beneficial ones, which is going to make all of our gardens stronger and just healthier and more diverse in the long run. So like any thriving ecosystem, our gardens are all about diversity and balance. So the main questions here that we're going to try to talk about is, how do we co-create a healthy balance in our gardens? How can we grow gardens that are inviting to our wildlife friends and even to some degree our frenemies? As organic gardeners, which a lot of us try to be, that's the goal we're striving for. How can we avoid poisons and pesticides and implement natural solutions to garden with nature instead of against nature. And we're gonna kind of dive into each of those elements. Okay, so first I'm gonna start off with just some general tips and go through some just sort of common garden practices to help create more balanced, diverse ecosystems. So number one, a lot of us know this, just say no to monocultures. So it's important to plant a diversity of plants. As many of you know, a monoculture is just too much of any one thing. So think of cornfields and soybean fields. Um, it's ripe for disease and destruction. You're more vulnerable to loss of plants, not to mention monocultures rob the soil of nutrients and harm beneficial bacteria and microorganisms. So we want to plant really a diversity of species. If you're just trying to grow nothing but tomatoes or peppers or squash, more than likely you're gonna create problems for yourself. And so it's important to, you know, balance that out. Biodiversity is key. The more diverse your garden is, the more resilient it will be, which is true in all of life, in our human communities as well. So just say no to monocultures. This is why part of my company, Wild World Gardens, is kind of pushing back against the monoculture of turf grass and lawns and shrinking that footprint of lawn in a lot of people's yards and sort of transforming, converting those spaces into habitat and native plant landscapes. We have so much lawn in this country, and a lot of it's unnecessary. I'm not like anti-lawn, but we just don't need as much as we have. Um, so a diverse garden attracts a greater variety of insects and wildlife, which in turn creates a healthier garden ecosystem. So thinking about, your vegetable garden and what, incorporating native plants, incorporating herbs, things like that to sort of help boost the diversity in your garden. Diverse garden creates habitat, which supports beneficial wildlife. A diverse garden minimizes weeds and improves soil. I know that Dr. Akila Martin, I think last month did a talk, did this lunch and grow on soil, and everything is based around soil. Soil is the most important, honestly, factor to all of this. You need to start with good soil. Soil is life. And so the biodiversity in our gardens help improve that soil and contribute to the beneficial organisms, microorganisms in the soil. So, and when you improve your soil, you're less likely to have disease in your plants. So really, there's probably a recording of that Elizabeth has shared through Chicago Grows Food. I highly recommend checking it out because soil is everything. A diverse garden, a vibrant jungle of vegetables, herbs, fruits, and flowers is more fun and has more flavor too, right? So general tip number two, not an easy thing to do, but try crop rotation. We are in a urban setting, so we have small spaces. I can barely manage to do this, but obviously this is something to strive for if you have room for it. This can be difficult in our small urban spaces, but it's possible. Different plants need different nutrients, and a vegetable plant grown repeatedly in the same spot over and over and over again, that will deplete the soil of those nutrients. And so it's if you can sort of switch up where you're growing things every 3 to 4 years, let's say, then that is very beneficial to your garden and to your landscape. Sometimes an insect or disease will force your hand. For example, I have this problem a lot in my garden, squash vine borers. They just destroy my squash plants, and they overwinter in the soil. And really, once established, they will just gut your squash vines year in and year out. So I try to rotate my crops. I have some other things I'll talk about to try to deter the squash vine borers, but their larva carves out or eats out the middle of the squash vine, and it's pretty ugly stuff. But crop rotation can help with that to a degree. Here's a sample crop rotation if you have the room for it every 3 to 4 years. Most of us don't have the room for this, but it's something to think about. Okay, I think the next two are probably, or the next three are probably the most important tips that I can give. Companion planting. Plants need friends too. So grow plants together that benefit and support one another. Companion plants can help increase soil nutrients, encourage beneficial insects, deter unwanted wildlife, and support pollinators. So some things like tomatoes and basil, right? Really go well together. Cucumbers and dill. Um, a lot of this is often like vegetables and herbs or vegetables and perennials. Great companion plants, even some vegetables along with vegetables. Um, so here's some examples of companion planting for to attract beneficial insects. Lettuce and sweet alyssum will attract ladybugs for aphid control. Broccoli and cosmos, also ladybugs, lacewings for aphid control. Cucumber and dill, those are great companion plants for cucumber beetle control. Squash and nasturtiums. I put nasturtiums all over my garden for squash bug control. Cabbage and chamomile. I have chamomile that just self-seeds every year. Love it. Plus it's a medicinal plant, which is great. Cabbage worm control. Tomatoes and basil can help with thrip and hornworm control. And peppers and radishes, the radish can serve as a trap crop, which we'll talk about, kind of as a decoy for to help keep unwanted guests off of your peppers. So those are all kind of like herbs and other, plants to think about planting with your vegetables. Here are some examples of native pollinator plants to consider planting alongside or nearby or, on the border of your vegetables. Strawberries really go well with golden ragwort, common cinquefoil, New Jersey tea, golden Alexanders. Uh, those pollinator plants will attract mason bees, miner bees, hoverflies, which will not only increase pollination of your vegetable plants and fruit plants, but also, help control some of those unwanted, not so beneficial insects and pests. Blackberries and raspberries, you can pair those with Jacob's ladder or penstemon or various indigos to attract bumblebees, sweat bees, carpenter bees. Tomatoes and peppers, an eggplant, you can pair with coreopsis, lead plant, obedient plant, purple prairie clover, indigos, wild bergamot, which is bee balm, purple coneflower, which is echinacea. That attracts bumblebees, hawk moths, various butterflies, carpenter bees. All of these are native insects that, are very important to our ecosystems and our gardens. A few more examples of native plants to think about incorporating into your landscape or vegetable gardens. Green beans, and milkweed, common milkweed or butterfly milkweed, blazing star, wild bergamot. That'll attract bumblebees and leafcutter bees. Squash, zucchini, melons, you pair those with sunflowers, coreopsis. You're going to see a lot of repeats here. Bee balm, so wild bergamot, lead plant. That will attract all sorts of beneficial bees, pollinating bees. And then just some general native plants for your vegetable garden. Partridge peas, which are an annual native. Purple prairie clover, which is in the legume family, so it puts nitrogen back into the soil. Wild bergamot, otherwise known as bee balm, attracts tons of bees, butterflies. Cone flowers also attract tons of butterflies and bees. Lead plant, blue wild indigo, all very important, very beneficial pollinator plants, all native to Chicago, Illinois, to consider incorporating into your vegetable garden. And I wanted to talk about this because there's a lot of native plant sales coming up or in process right now or happening, going to be happening. So kind of making that list in your mind or on paper what you might want to order for your gardens. A classic example of companion planting is the Native American Three Sisters garden, right? So this is a perfect example of how plants work together on all sorts of levels. So it's corn, beans, and squash. The corn serves as a trellis for the beans, right? The beans fix nitrogen back into the soil, which corn uses a lot of as it grows. And the squash essentially provides a living mulch to prevent weeds and also deters unwanted insects and animals. these kind of practices and strategies, which are, you know, stood the test of time, uh, they're there for a reason. And the more that you can plant plants that go together, the more resilient and happy your garden will be.
Jeremy,
Another
I have a quick question that came in the chat about companion planting. It says, is it better to companion plant in the same soil, or can you still get the benefits of companion planting when plants are in separate containers but in close proximity to each other?
Absolutely. Yes. Um, yeah, like I said, when I did not have the space to have raised beds or a backyard, I pretty much did container planting. And so companion plant in containers as well, uh, is definitely the way to go. Does not have to be in the same soil. Um, so another tip is to try trap crops. Trap crops, another word for these, are just sacrificial plants, essentially, decoys. So every garden needs some sacrificial offerings. Trap cropping uses plants as decoys to distract and draw away insects and other wildlife from your desirable crops. You could use the same species as your main crop, so just plant more of things and to sort of have a sacrificial offering to the rabbits or to the squirrels or to the, you know, birds or bugs, or you can use different species as decoys. What are some good trap crops? Radishes are awesome trap crops. At least, you know, planting those right now. I just direct sowed my radish seeds last week, so a little bit late, but so love to use those as trap crops. I mean, I like radishes, but I don't need that many. So they will, you know, help control flea beetles, harlequin bugs, amaranth, nasturtiums, sunflowers are amazing trap crops. Zinnias, marigolds. Um, but like I said, even vegetables, even your vegetable plants, if you have the room, just plant more and sort of kind of use some of them as like, you know, oh, some of my plants got destroyed, but I'm not going to sweat it because I have others because I planted more. And then one of my favorite tips, most important in my mind, is to plant for pollinators, predators, and parasitizers. So one of the best methods for deterring unwanted creatures is to provide food and habitat for the species you do want. So we have a praying mantis here, who's one of our main predators in the garden. When you plant for beneficial bugs, you create a healthier ecosystem as a whole, and your garden will thank you. So let's talk a little bit about each of these. Pollinators. So thinking about pollinators, bees, butterflies, flies, moths, wasps, hummingbirds. Often we only think about pollinators as bees and butterflies, but so many flies, so many wasps are also great pollinators. That, you know, they get a bad rap, but they are important species. Honeybees are pollinators. That's usually where our minds go, but they are honestly not as efficient or specialized as our native bees. Honeybees are essentially, they're European and essentially they're livestock. And while they're good to some degree, they are often they have been replacing a lot of our native pollinators and native bees. And so it's really important to provide habitat and ecosystems and plants for our native species. They have evolved in symbiosis with our native landscapes and native plants, and so they are just more specialized and efficient at pollinating and also chomping down on those unwanted guests. So they rely on native plants for food and habitat. So planting native pollinator plants will attract them. They will ensure better pollination of your food plants, and some will eat the detrimental insects as well. So for example, hoverflies here, which kind of look like bees, but a little but different, smaller. Hoverflies are excellent pollinators, and their larvae eat tons of aphids. So plant coreopsis, plant coneflower, plant black-eyed Susans, sunflowers to attract the hoverflies, some of the other native pollinators. Predators, we want to attract these to our gardens. Might not think of ladybugs as predators, but they are vicious, especially their larvae. So ladybugs, lacewings, praying mantid is the plural, I guess. Spiders, assassin bugs, soldier beetles. They eat other bugs, and you want them in your garden. Did you know that ladybug larvae can eat up to 40 aphids an hour? So this is a ladybug larva on the left, this picture here, which looks so much scarier than the cute little ladybug adult. But their larvae are awesome and they chomp aphids. A question I get to often get asked is, what about you can buy ladybugs, right? And sort of release them into your garden. Is that a good practice? I I would you could do that, but the problem with that is you'll have a glut of ladybugs. You'll have a bunch of ladybugs and they'll eat up everything, all the aphids and everything that they want, and then usually they disappear and go and move on to somewhere else. Um, and then the aphids come back. And so it's sort of a, releasing ladybugs, buying them and releasing them into your garden is sort of a short-term fix, is in my experience. And so I think it's more important to plant the plants to attract them so that there's always something for them there. Uh, and they'll stay long term and they'll find a home in your garden, and that's what you want. Um, so attract these predators with flowering herbs and pollinator plants like dill, cilantro, milkweed, alyssum, marigolds, cosmos, bee balm, yarrow, goldenrod, etc., which is a combination of native plants and herbs. Um, and then parasitizers. These are the parasitic wasps, uh, which are not harmful to you at all, and they're super beneficial to your garden. They're also crazy looking, so at least they're larvae. Like something out of a sci-fi movie, they lay their eggs on or in other bugs. The parasitic wasps do, and their larvae feed on the host insects. So here's a tomato hornworm that has been parasitized by a braconid wasp, and they've laid their eggs on the hornworm, and the eggs hatch, and the baby wasps just essentially chomp down the host. They gut it and eat it from the inside out. And it's like I think that's what inspired the movie Alien. But as harsh and creepy as that sounds, it's super beneficial to your garden. So we want to attract those pollinators, predators, and parasitizers. All these general tips are great strategies for incorporating biological controls and creating a healthy ecological balance in your gardens, especially when it comes to insects. So those are tips on how to invite beneficial insects into your garden. But what about those other garden visitors? Rabbits, rats, squirrels, raccoons. Get lots of questions about this all the time. We have lots of rabbits and rats and squirrels in our garden spaces, in our landscapes. So how can we discourage them from chomping on our plants? There's a few ways. Here we can look to nature as well. The right plants are sometimes, I wouldn't even say often, but sometimes natural deterrents for many of these furry garden munchers. I feel like the rabbits and the squirrels and the wildlife in the city is on another level compared to, you know, elsewhere. They're just more, I don't know what if they're more, I guess they're more street smart and they're just more determined to eat your plants. So is my experience. So, I encourage you to think about planting plants with a strong scent that can sometimes discourage these animals. Rabbits don't usually like onions, garlic, lavender, sage, hyssop, catnip, sweet alyssum. Squirrels tend to not like nasturtiums, mustard, greens. Rats, you know, plant onions, mint, echinacea, thyme. You can interplant these with your food plants or as a border around your garden. I always plant marigolds around my tomatoes, something I learned from my mom, and that helps create sort of a border that rabbits don't like and that squirrels don't like, but it only works a little bit. Like I said, these animals are pretty determined in the city to get at your plants because there's not too many options for them. So I get it. There are also sort of old time remedies passed down from elders and those who have gardened before us. So my mom, she swears that hair keeps bunnies out of her garden, so she always hits up her hairdresser for bags of hair and spreads it around her vegetable garden. Other examples include, you've probably seen like fox pee or predator urine, coyote pee, cayenne pepper, talcum powder, um, dried blood meal, hot sauce, dish soap, Irish Spring soap shavings. I think my mom uses that sometimes. The only problem with that stuff is that you have to reapply it again and again because the rain will wash away the scent or they'll just lose their effectiveness. So like it's kind of another example of a short-term fix that just needs to be reapplied. So yeah, they'll work, but not in the long term. And kind of what I'm trying to get to encourage is like just thinking about the long term, sort of creating that biodiversity and balance in our gardens, which will uh, work year after year. Some people even recommend clear glass jars of water, mirror, or aluminum foil because rabbits and squirrels are scared of the reflection. Look at this rabbit. It's like it's searching for the meaning of life, it looks like. Um, yeah, I I've never really tried this, but I've had people tell me that it can work sometimes. So let me know if you've tried it and if it's worked. Uh, but I have used foil to address my squash vine borer problem, and so I've wrapped the young stems of my squash in aluminum foil, and this helps prevent the larvae from burrowing into the stems. That has worked for me for sure. I think the best bet for our city gardens is physical barriers. I hate to say it, but that's really your best course of action against hungry guests in your garden. Fencing, screening, netting, row covers, wire, cloche, etc. So chicken wire fencing or quarter-inch hardware cloth. Can install this around your beds about 4 feet off the ground. Critters can still dig under, so you need to bury it as well. You can also wrap this around individual plants like a cylinder for protection. For raised beds, this is something we often do when we build raised beds, install hardware cloth or a wire mesh at the bottom of the bed to deter burrowing creatures like rats. Um, Chicken wire fencing or quarter-inch hardware cloth, install this around your beds about 4 feet off the ground, 4 to 6 feet off the ground. Critters can still dig under. So bury it 6 inches as well. Oh, I think I already had that on the previous slide. But yeah, kind of creating a barrier around a physical barrier around your uh, raised beds in your gardens. This is a great hack. I use these dollar store waste baskets. Honestly, the one on the right there, you can buy them in like 10 packs or 20 packs, super cheap. And I'll cover young plants, young seedlings, and other vulnerable plants, especially like lettuce, with those until they get big enough. Um, it lets in the air and light and keeps the rodents from munching on it. So that's a good garden hack. Netting is a good protection as well against many animals. But all of this is very complicated, like I said, because you net your plants and you're deterring some species, but it's not going to deter all the insects really. And also you want those birds to eat some of the insects on your plants. So, you know, do some netting if you need to. But remember, I think the key is also plant other plants, trap crops, things like that to encourage birds to eat some of the insects you don't want. And then there's rats. I've had rat problems in my garden. They're definitely an issue in our urban area. They eat what we eat. They love messy areas, dense plantings where they feel protected. They also burrow to make their nests. So just some steps to sort of keep the rats at bay. Um, Seal compost bins and garbage cans. Remove access to food and water sources, including pet food and pet poop. Remove clutter and cut down grass and weeds. Rats navigate with their whiskers and they prefer to use walls and foundations to get around. So it's a good idea to cut back vegetation around 2 feet from the sides of buildings. They won't have as much cover and they'll be less likely to travel through these exposed areas. If you need to use traps, try catch and release traps for these types of creatures, rats, squirrels, and other rodents. You could build a simple box trap. That's the one on the bottom is one that I built for rabbits. If you are going to release these animals in, somewhere else, you need to acquire a trapping permit from from the IDNR, Illinois Department of Natural Resources. You're not supposed to just like capture rabbits and squirrels and stuff and release them in the forest preserves without a permit. What if a rat has already made nests in my garden? Well, find the holes. They often have an entrance, an exit, and an escape tunnel. If you've taken the previous steps, then hopefully you've discouraged them from sticking around. If they're still there, then you might have to set up traps, which is a worst case scenario. Once they've moved out, you don't want other rats or animals to move in. So seal up the holes with concrete or sand. I've also seen people use steel wool and hardware mesh to close up rat holes. The whole point is to try to not use poison if you can. Okay, so back to insects. Let's look at some organic pesticide alternatives. So one thing that works really well, especially on aphids, is soapy water. Mix 2 teaspoons of dish soap with 1 pint of water. You can spray on aphids, mites, whiteflies, and thrips. For Japanese beetles, hand pick them off and drop them in soapy water. Even just a strong spray from the hose will often knock these insects off. Essential oils work to some degree. So things like rosemary oil, lavender oil, lemongrass oil for some insect larvae like cabbage loopers. Try a peppermint oil, orange oil for squash bugs, aphids, whiteflies. We often get asked about neem oil. So neem is kind of a last resort. It can be used on both insects and fungal diseases. The oil coats the bodies of the insects and suffocates them. It's effective, but like a lot of broad spectrum pesticides, essentially, it can also harm pollinators and beneficial insects. So I would use neem only as a last resort if try some of these other methods first. I would say one of the best ways, as much of a hassle as it can be, is just physical and preventative controls work best. So when you see that the damage is done to your plants, then it's probably already too late. Walk through your garden as much as possible, not only to get to know your plants really well, to ground yourself, but also to check for any issues. Look at plant stems, the foliage, especially under plant leaves. That's where insects like to lay their eggs. You can prune off and dispose of dead, diseased plant parts. You know, those dead like tomato branches. You can prune those off and then hand pick off insects. What I often like to do is wrap duct tape around my fingers, sticky side out, and I'll tap. When I see insects or larvae, and they'll come off on the tape. If I see like Japanese beetles or aphids or things like that. Okay, so before I get to mosquitoes and the last couple things, so I think the main thing is, these physical preventative controls are important, but the more important aspect is really, like I said, just creating that ecosystem, that beneficial ecosystem in your garden. Planting other plants, inviting or making a home and habitat for the beneficial insects and wildlife that are going to help control some of these unwanted insects. Someone had asked me about this, so I just wanted to, we live in the city and mosquitoes have been bad, so some good methods for controlling mosquitoes, and this is a little less about gardening and just kind of in general. One thing that I always recommend are these mosquito dunks. So really the best way to control mosquitoes is in their larval stage. And so I use these mosquito dunks to do this. We have sort of a, a wet area in our backyard. And so what these are, they're non-toxic bacteria. I forget the name of it. BTI is the acronym. That targets the mosquito larva. And so in spring, you get a bucket, fill it with water, add a handful of straw or hay, set it out in the sun, and add one of these mosquito dunks. You can get like a 20 pack for like 20 bucks or 30 bucks. Super effective. So, and the female mosquitoes will be attracted to that straw water mixture bucket, and they'll lay their eggs in there, and that brew, and the dunks will do the work and essentially kill the mosquito larva. And you can, each dunk lasts for about a month, and much more effective than what I've found than, people plant citronella, other sort of mosquito deterring plants, which work and don't work. And also using pesticides and control, just don't do it, because that's also just a short-term fix. It doesn't really get to the root of the problem. So these dunks really work well, in my experience. Okay. I want to talk about this. Chicago Growers Food shared a post, I think, earlier this week that that shared some information on cicadas. This has just been coming up in with a lot of my clients, what to do about the cicada apocalypse that's happening soon. So as a lot of you might have heard, we have our 17-year periodical cicadas. They'll be emerging in northern Illinois, and then south of us, especially like Springfield area, that'll be synced with the 13-year cicada emergence. So about for 4 to 6 weeks, from about mid-May to late June, millions of these big red-eyed insects will take over the great outdoors, and it's going to be loud and it's going to be crunchy. And I, for one, welcome our cicada overlords. They're fine. It's not a huge deal. It's going to be a little crazy though. But guess what? They will be mostly harmless, mostly. One thing to consider with the cicadas is that, or just the amount that we're going to have, is that they can potentially harm young trees and shrubs, especially fruit trees. After they mate, the females will make small slits in the slender branches and twigs or stems to lay their eggs, especially young trees, shrubs. They love to lay their eggs on fruit trees. So think of like the size of a pencil. Think of like a branch or a twig, the size of a pencil. That's what they like to lay their eggs in. The nymphs, the cicada nymphs will hatch. They'll fall to the ground. They'll go underground for another 17 years. No problem there. But that egg laying, just the amounts that's going to happen, could pose problems, as those small slits can weaken and damage young vulnerable trees and shrubs. So some strategies to minimize that. Say you planted some trees, young trees, newly planted trees last fall, or even this spring. You might want to consider wrapping them in like a netting, a fine mesh netting, like a tully cloth or whatever, before all these cicadas emerge next month. Make sure to tie it up at the bottom. And then after they're all gone, then you can remove the netting. So, you'll essentially be netting those young vulnerable trees for a month, 4 to 6 weeks. And that will deter the cicada females from laying their eggs in those branches. Another thing is just delaying your planting of any smaller new trees or shrubs until after the emergence ends in June. So even better, you could wait until fall to plant your fruit trees or new trees and shrubs, which is a great time to plant trees and shrubs anyway. So 2 ways to kind of get around potential cicada damage. Okay, so almost done here. Main takeaways. We want to work with nature to create a balanced and resilient garden. We want to plant a diversity of vegetables, fruits, herbs, and flowers if possible. Rotate your plants if possible, not always possible at all. Feed your soil. Healthy soil equals healthy plants that are more likely to fight off diseases and withstand damage. I usually do this in the fall. I'll add compost to my raised beds, or even, if I don't get around to it, in the spring. Feed your soil, add some compost, add some organic matter. Leave your leaves that they're going to decompose and feed your soil. Yeah. Number 4, make some sacrifices. So that trap cropping is maybe a good strategy, some sacrificial offerings. Number 5, use physical barriers and controls to protect your plants. Number 6, plant for all types of insects and animals. Remember, the bad bugs feed the good bugs, as well as the birds and other animals. And sometimes the pests grow up to be beneficial as well. And I think the main thing is just kind of have a realistic tolerance for guests in your garden, where we live in tight spaces in the city here. And like I said, there's not a lot of options for insects and wildlife to eat. And so when you plant a garden, you're definitely opening up an invitation to them. And so just need to be realistic and don't stress out too much. We're very fortunate to live in a vibrant, lively, and complex urban ecosystem filled with wonderful wildlife. Your gardens are just one piece of that dynamic puzzle. So try to do some of the strategies that I mentioned, and I think everyone will be a lot happier, and your gardens will be more resilient and dynamic and diverse. And if you have questions for me after this or want to contact me, you can reach me. I'm on Instagram at Wild World Gardens, or you can go to my website, wildworldgardens.com. Boom. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
All right, Jeremy, we had one question in the chat that came up, I think, while you were sharing your mosquito slide about why do you need the straw and not just water?
Here, let's go back to that if I can find it. There it is. Oh, yeah, I'm not sharing my screen anyway, so never mind. But anyway, yeah, the straw will attract, it kind of creates this brew that attracts the female mosquitoes, and they'll want to lay their eggs in there. I don't know if it has something to do with pheromones or something like that, but the advice that I've always received is, yeah, put some straw or hay or just organic dead plant material matter in there. That's where they like to lay their eggs. And then you add one of those dunks and it works really well.
And then we had a question come in about the cicadas. I have a few young trees. Will they be okay not to plant until fall? They are currently housed in the small planters they arrived in.
Yeah, I would say, well, it depends on what they are. And you could, well, I mean, if they're outside, you're gonna want to cover them up anyway, probably, if they're not sheltered. Um, and then, if you can wait till after June, anytime after June is going to be a good time to plant those trees. But they should be fine if you have a safe spot for them and you're watering them and taking care of them and, yeah, covering them up. Fall is just really the best. That's when we plant a lot of our trees and shrubs because it's it gives them time to get established over the winter, and it's a great time for planting woody plants. But not everyone can do that, obviously. So just some strategies to think about how to keep the cicadas off of them. And really the netting is the best way. And like I said, it's essentially just young, very young, like small twigs and branches like this that they really will really want to lay their eggs in.
And then another question about the cicadas, is painting a tree's trunk a good strategy to prevent damage from cicadas?
Oh, interesting. I don't know. I want to say no, but I'll have to look that up. I'll have to ask. I mean, I know people paint trees anyway to keep other insects off, but I'm not sure if it works on cicadas. Good question. I don't have the answer for that.
We'll
I mean,
definitely look it up and follow up.
yeah, follow up. I mean, the entomologists and like the people I've talked to, the scientists, the webinars and lectures I've watched, they really recommend the netting method as like the best strategy. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. It's 1 p.m. I'll hang out a few more minutes if people want to chit chat. If you want to continue the conversation, get on Community Food Navigator. I put the link in the chat. It will also be in the follow-up email. And if Jeremy, if you can hang on another minute, if maybe there's a few more questions, so we can get them answered.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for hanging out.